I bought this $99 mic and plugged it into my laptop, which was already 7 years old. And that was it. I just recorded the first episode. In the first 7 days, probably got, I want to say, like 800 downloads. It was this contractual dispute that I was involved in. It was a fucking nightmare. But my podcast was down for a period of time. And it was really a massive toll on me emotionally.
How do you set those boundaries in place when it comes to all of these problems coming to you? You're expected to provide a solution. Where do you draw those boundaries?
I used to feel like I had to reply to every single DM. And I enjoyed this interaction with the audience, but I was tired. I was getting burnt out.
The number one reason we see businesses and brands not post content is because they're scared of being judged. They're scared of putting themselves out there. Why does it happen? And what can people do to kind of work around those roadblocks?
Our brains are just wired to avoid discomfort.
What advice would you give to people that are wanting to put themselves out there but feel as though they're feeling blocked by that?
So the number one thing is expect some sort of a reaction. I think the first thing you want to acknowledge is that who you are right now is a representation of your past. So when you start to change, there will be pushback.
If you could go back and do the podcast, if there was one thing that you've learned in your time of doing the podcast and you could go back, or you were to start a new podcast now,
Yep.
what would you do differently? What would you do the same?
One thing that I would definitely do the same is
Alexis, welcome to Top of Mind. Now, you are a podcast host, you're a Pilates instructor, fitness instructor, you're an author, and you're a neuroscientist, and you're a friend of mine.
yes.
Which one do you prefer?
Well, the friend, obviously. Our dinners, our pasta dinners.
Absolutely.
Yes.
No, ignoring friend. Which title? Like you do so much and you've done so much.
I think the one that probably aligns the most with me is my podcast, because it's so encompassing of who I am. I talk about so many different topics. I am so myself. I'm also myself in my books, but it's very edited, and you've got, you know, an editor who's going to go through it and someone who, you know, changes aspects of it. The podcast is just me. It's raw. It's real. So I would align the most with that.
So you're a podcaster.
I'm a podcaster.
She's a podcast host of Do You Fucking Mind, and I love it because not only do I really enjoy swearing, I think it allows people to be relatable, but everything that you put in there is just so insightful. Like,
Thank you.
It makes understanding why we think the way that we think really easy to digest, to understand, to relate to. How did it start?
Well, it actually started because I was 1 year into my master's in neuroscience and I was loving it. And it was one of those degrees where, okay, there were a couple of boring subjects, but in general, it was every time I'd come home, I would be like, this is such a cool fact, not just if you're into science, like this is a cool party fact. I need to tell everyone about this. So I would be telling people about what I learned and, you know, like really cool things like how optical illusions work and how you can trick your brain into believing something. I just thought it was incredible. So every time I talk about it, people are like, oh my God, your eyes are lighting up right now. I would just get so excited. So I thought, okay, maybe I should, because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my career. I just was studying the brain because I loved it. I didn't know what the future would hold. Would I work in a lab? I thought maybe I'll be a lecturer because I love talking about the brain. This is perfect. And I used to want to be an actor back in the day. So I was like, performance, the brain, link it together. I'll be a lecturer. This will be a great career option for me. And so in the meantime, I thought, well, why don't I actually do something with this? I love talking about it. When you talk about a topic, when you teach someone else about the topic, it consolidates the information for you. So one of the best ways to learn is to teach. So I thought, why don't I do a YouTube channel or a podcast? And I was leaning towards YouTube channel, but I kept putting off filming the videos because I was like, what an effort. You've got to, you know, fuck that. You've got to, you know, like do yourself up and then you've got to edit it. And this is when I had just I had no equipment whatsoever to do it. Tried filming a video once. It was so bad. I wish I still had it just to look back at it, but it was terrible. And then my friends asked me to go on their podcast to talk about breakups because I'd gone through two really interesting ones. And I did it and I was like, this is so epic. Like this is unbelievable. You can just be talking, having a conversation. It flows. I can't imagine there'd be much editing. I'm doing it. So I bought this $99 mic and plugged it into my laptop, which was already 7 years old. And that was it. I just recorded the first episode. I created the artwork based off a selfie, which I then turned into like a cartoon through some app. And it's still the same artwork. I keep saying I'm going to update it, but I don't know when I will. But it's still that artwork that I just like slapped together, and then I put that in Canva and put the text over it. And then I just uploaded the first episode without even knowing what the other episodes would be. There was no back catalogue. There was nothing. It was one episode, and it was called Take a Leap of Faith, and I put it out there. And it just very organically started to gain a bit of traction, and that's how it started.
If you love this episode, help us to grow and reach more people by hitting the subscribe button and leaving a review. So it's the irony is not lost on me that, you just started. Like, you just put one episode up there, and I think that's one piece of advice that I give to a lot of people wanting to start businesses and do ideas and things like that. I'm like, just start.
Yes.
Just do it. You don't need a whole plan. You don't need a business plan. You don't need a marketing plan. Just start.
Yeah.
How long after your first episode were you like, oh, fuck, I've got to do a second episode?
I think it was exactly 1 week after when I was like, should I be doing this weekly? And then I quickly put together like the second episode and quickly recorded it and put it up. And mind you, I remember I recorded the first episode, but there was kind of 10 minutes left just to wrap it up. And I went out for dinner, and then the next day I went to finish it. And I thought, oh, I'm overthinking it. I don't love it. I'm going to redo it. And then I thought, no. The actual title of this thing is Take a Leap of Faith. Yeah. That was the title. And I was like, no, just put it out there. Put it out there. It's not going to be perfect. And then I knew that there was some really good bits in there. And I thought, this isn't scripted. I don't script my podcasts. So I would just not be able to recreate the bits that I did like. So I thought, oh, fuck it. I'm just going to put it out there and it can only get better from here.
Totally.
And
I think it's like there's a saying that I heard recently that it's, confidence follows action.
Yes.
And I think that so many people think that you have to be confident or 100% in what you're doing before you do the thing.
Totally.
And I think, when I started my business, same thing, like just put it out there. I was like, hey guys, I'm doing my own thing now.
Yeah.
Like I had no clients.
That's right. And also you're doing your best. It's not like you've put out dog shit and you're like, this is dog shit and I'm just going to hope people buy it. It's not that. It's when you started your business, you knew you were good at what you did, but this was your first time doing it on your own.
The way that it was.
So you're like, I know it could be better, but this is the best that I can offer right now.
Absolutely.
You're putting in the effort. And that's kind of how I felt. I thought, well, if I were to do another episode, it's going to be, I'm just second guessing myself too much. I should just put this out there because I was happy with it yesterday. Now I'm just overthinking it. And I think a lot of people will get to that point where they're in the overthinking phase because when they're doing it, they're in the moment, they're in the zone, they're in a good groove, and it's only when they remove themselves out of it that they start second guessing, questioning, over-analyzing, and that's when you start getting really, really critical on things that other people probably wouldn't notice. Yeah. And that's when you just need to just do it.
And so like layering your understanding of the brain and how that works then, the number one reason we see businesses and brands not post content is because they're scared of being judged. They're scared of putting themselves out there. They're scared of the content not being perfect. There's all of these elements or roadblocks that they get to before they actually just go, you know what, I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah.
Obviously, you went through those roadblocks mentally because you were like, I'm not going to put it out there. It's not perfect. It could be better. Shall I do it again? From a neuroscience or brain point of view, why does it happen? And what can people do to kind of work around those roadblocks?
So the reason why it happens in the first place is because our brains are just wired to avoid discomfort. So that's how we're all wired to be. But what you deem as, because discomfort is pain, right? And what you deem as painful is on a scale. There's really painful things that you absolutely have to avoid, and that's survival. And then there's things that's a little bit painful. And for those things, like should I post this, scared of judgment from someone who you don't even know, those things, you can choose how big they are. But if you're always avoiding them, you're teaching your brain that it's as big as something that's quite threatening. But the more you do it, the more you teach your brain this is actually not a threat. It's just uncomfortable. But it's a discomfort that I can live with quite easily, So I guess what's really difficult about it is the only way to overcome it is to do it, because you have to do it in order for your brain to learn otherwise. The more you avoid it, the bigger it gets. It's like anything. The more you avoid something, the bigger it's growing in the background. It's kind of like any fear, any insecurity, it just keeps growing. So if it's, with posting, sometimes you're almost better off posting when you have a small audience, because you've got less people that are going to judge you. So don't freak out.
Totally.
Don't, just put it out there. Some people say to me, I really, really, really want to start a podcast, but I'm so like, what if it doesn't work out? I said, well, if it doesn't work out, what does that mean? You don't have an audience. So what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
Who's there to judge you? Nobody, because it flopped.
Exactly.
So there's nothing to fear. And if it does well, then you've got a big audience, and a big audience indicates it did well. So you have nothing to lose.
Totally, I agree. I think it reminds me of I went to the Stephen Bartlett show on the weekend, and he talks about like type 1 and type 2 decisions. So like your type 1 decision is, where you can't, it's not reversible. Like you can't go back to where you were once you step through that door.
Yes.
And the type 2 decisions are the ones that are reversible. Like you can go back to where you were and how you make those decisions. Like, can you go back to, if I make this decision to launch my business, or I make this decision to start posting on social media or building my website, whatever it is, can I go back if it doesn't work? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
Like you can always go back to your day job. You can go back to not posting. Like you can always go back. Yeah. And it's not something that is threatening, so to speak, and not something that's irreversible. So I think it comes down to those kind of type 1 and type 2 decisions of like, can you always go back to what you were doing before? Yes.
Yeah, but interesting with that, because that's very true. But interestingly, there's been studies that have been done on irreversible decisions. And when a decision is irreversible, you're actually more likely to be happy with the outcome because it's irreversible.
Interesting.
When you know that it's, and this is why people need to, because that's a buffer, that's a protective buffer, which is great to have, because otherwise a lot of people wouldn't do certain things. If they're like, I'm losing my home, my job, my friendship group, my relationship, a lot of people, of course, have to second guess it because they don't want to lose something important to them. But that protective buffer makes you sit in this position of the grass is greener on the other side, or what if, one foot in this door, one foot in that door. When you make a decision irreversible, you instantly are inclined to prefer that decision because you're like, well, it's my only option, so I'm going to water the grass right here. Yeah. And they did this study. I wish I could quote who did the study, but it was a study that was done where people would go in and there would be 6 photographs and they would get to pick which photograph they liked the best. So there were 2 groups. One group would pick one, and that's it. You've got that photograph. You cannot come back. You cannot change your mind. You have to stay with that photograph. The other group, they had 3 days to change their mind. Most of the people in the other group did change their mind. And then 3 weeks later, they asked how satisfied they were with that decision. The ones that could not change their mind were all thrilled with the photo they had selected. They're like, no, it's the best one. I love it. I'm so happy. I only had 10 minutes to choose and I'm so happy I chose this one. Yeah. And the other group that went back swapped the photo because they ummed and ahed and I have the chance. They were really unhappy with their decision. They were like, oh, I should have stuck with the first one, or oh, I don't know. Because they had all this time just to second guess and think about shit that doesn't matter.
Totally. I think it comes back to that concept of trusting your gut as well, right? Like I think the older I get, and I'm sure you're probably the same, the more I trust my gut. And I think growing up, it's like, God, I thought that initially, but like I didn't back myself enough or didn't have enough knowledge or experience to know that this was, my first instinctual thought was the right way to do things or the best way to do things. And I think there was a similar study done with like trusting your gut, and it was like people that picked partners based on what they wanted on paper versus a gut feeling. Yeah. The relationships that were based on gut feeling were like 80% more successful than those that were, this is what I want on paper. Yeah. So it comes back to trusting your gut. And it's like, if that's the right thing at that point in time, like you can only ever have 100% certainty in hindsight. Yeah. Right? So it's like being able to trust the decision that you're making right now is the best one with the knowledge and the information that you've got.
Totally. And that's intuition,
Absolutely.
Which comes from experience and it comes from wisdom. That's why the older you get, the easier it is to, learn to trust your gut.
Absolutely. Now, going back to your podcast, you didn't, when you started your podcast, you didn't really have much of a following, right?
No. Well, I had So on Instagram, I had around 10,000 followers, but they were almost all male. My engagement was super low. And this was from when I was doing more fitness-related things. It was shared on a few brand things, but I'm talking I would get maximum 100 likes a photo. Like it was quite low, the engagement for the following, for the 10,000 followers. And yeah, it was just very, I was like not that active on the page. So it was kind of like a bit of I almost would have rather the audience be smaller and be
More
legitimate, engaged an audience. So it was pretty bad, the audience that I did have.
And then as you launched your podcast, did you use Instagram as the main medium to kind of communicate that that's what you were doing?
Yes, I did. So what did help me was that, like I mentioned earlier, I was as a guest on my friend's podcast.
Yes.
So that podcast gained me couple of hundred followers probably from that one episode, and a lot of people who listened to that episode DMing me saying, "Oh my God, that story sounds like mine. Oh my God, I learned so much listening to this," or "I've also dated a narcissist," or blah, 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 all this stuff. So I already had all these people that were engaged in that. Then I announced on my Instagram, I'm going to be releasing a podcast in like 2 days kind of thing. So then I released it, and that was where I was sharing that I had released a podcast. I shared the link on my Instagram, and those initial people that had heard my episode 2 months earlier on my friend's podcast, they were the first to and of course friends and family, but they were the ones to jump on and listen. So my first ever episode in the first 7 days probably got, I want to say, like 800 downloads or something.
Right.
And I was like, I am killing it. This is amazing. I was like, this is unbelievable.
I'm resigning.
I quit.
I'm a millionaire.
I was like, how are there 800 people that have listened to this? I just thought that was awesome.
Yeah.
And every episode that I released after that, it was this steady
Growth.
climb. And my Instagram was reflecting that climb pretty closely. Like the moment I released my podcast, my Instagram growth started to grow.
Interesting.
And I know obviously now that that's of course because of all the people that, were following me on Instagram, who were then sharing the link on Instagram. And a lot of people, they would share the link to my podcast on their stories, but then they would tag my Instagram page on there.
Yep.
And so I noticed, and I'd be resharing it, and you're resharing all this stuff. And so, but now I have a much bigger audience on my podcast than I do on my Instagram. And I get a lot of people who will email me or comment on, sometimes I'll put up a video on my Facebook page, on the Facebook group.
Yeah.
And people will say, "Oh my God, I had no idea what you actually look like other than the artwork, the podcast artwork." So there are so many people, even on the Facebook group, that don't follow me on Instagram, don't know what I look like other than the cartoonized version of myself on the artwork, which I find really interesting.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
So then in terms of how you started to promote that, like you obviously had Instagram that you were sharing it and you built that community there. Then you launched the Facebook group to kind of start to nurture that community?
Correct. So I launched the Facebook group pretty late in the piece. I launched it probably 6 months in. That's just typical me putting things off. I'm like, guys, I was talking about on the podcast saying, I'm doing a Facebook group soon. And then it was 6 months in that I finally did it. I was like, oh God. But that was a great place for people to just come in and, you get your rogue people on the group all the time.
What's the roguest thing that's
so the rogue people, we've got group rules now. You have to set group rules. But I would say that some rogue things that happen is people will sometimes come onto the group and want to get people's opinion on an argument that they've had with someone via text, and they share all the screenshots. I feel like it's breaches of privacy going on. I'm like, you can't do that. The person who's written, they have not consented to this. Like, we have to take it down. So we're constantly taking down stuff like that, which I understand. Like, people are in a moment of passion and they're like, who's going to be on my side? Who's going to agree with me? This group of people that's, So you have to just obviously police it quite carefully. Someone got into a car accident once and was posting 20 photos of a car accident on the Facebook page, asking for who's at fault. And I'm like, no. No.
That is not what we're using
This is not what the group is about. So
Alexis's complaint line.
yeah, I know. So you want to nurture it because I like the fact that people feel like this is their safe space, and it's
that's a
where
bonus,
they can,
right?
Yeah, it's great.
Like on one side you've got like this community that feel like they can share the inner workings of their brain with you. But then on the other side, it's like, but you also have to protect like the privacy and like, you know, not political, but like I suppose you don't want to kind of get into a like he said, she said argument.
Exactly. And you've got to respect, at the end of the day, the group is there. I think a lot of people do also go to that page to ask for really specific mental health advice. It's not a mental health advice page, and I don't want to make it out to be that. No. I give general advice. Yeah. I would never give specific mental health advice when it comes to like a clinical setting. So I think it's really important that like even those posts, like we have like group rules and we're like, please don't be asking for specific advice because at times we'll have to take it down, because we don't want unsolicited advice from other people who are not qualified either. And we've got to police that. But separate to that, it is a great page because people share really great things. They share great resources. I'll often on the podcast say, hey, I'm doing a 30-day challenge and in the 30 days you've got to do X, Y, Z. People will take photos of their own little worksheets and they share it. This is how I've done it. This is how. So it's such – people have created their own meetups and then shared photos where they've, been in different cities in New Zealand, Australia. There's been a meetup in the UK, in LA, and they share the photos they've met through the group. So it's really, really cool to build community. That page has been unbelievable.
And I think that's something that I really wanted to talk to you about in terms of building community. Like I think now brands are moving towards building a community over, which will subsequently then build their brand.
Yes.
Like if you've got a committed community to backing you, embracing you, asking you questions, trusting you, knowing you, liking you.
Yeah.
That's going to naturally convert to them wanting to be engaged with anything that you put out.
Yeah.
How did you, well, obviously you built that community by putting your podcast out there and sharing value. But for anyone that's looking to start to build a community around anything, whether it's around their brand, their business, maybe they've launched a podcast or perhaps they want to create a community around, an Instagram page that they've started that helps people do X, Y, and Z. What would you say kind of the three kind of core ingredients of building a community are?
Yeah. There's so many, but I think the first one is first you've got to have a very clear understanding in what you have to offer. So communities can be built around comedy. There's a lot of great comedy podcasts that have such a diehard community around that and they share that same humor. Yeah. So they lean on the community for more of that. You could be someone who's offering education. I think I offer a solution. But you've got to know what it is that you offer because then it's a lot easier to interact with your audience and with your community. Yeah. So because I'm offering what I consider to be a solution, people come to me or come to my podcast to understand how to deal with a heartbreak, how to identify a narcissist, how to become more focused, how to not doom scroll 30 times a day. And so I think because people come for this solution, they also like to find like-minded people who are on that journey with them. So now you're already starting to understand, okay, now I've got a clear journey that my audience is on. Even though they're very different individuals, they're on a similar journey. So then you can understand, okay, so for me, I like to interact with my audience I always ask them what topics do they want more of. Yep. I will poll my audience regularly, which is reminding me that I need to poll them more often now because I used to do it all the time. I'm like, I haven't done that in a while.
That's on the to-do list.
Yeah, but I would poll them all the time, question boxes constantly, and then sharing their answers anonymously, but sharing their answers. People love to have their answers shared or to feel validated by seeing other people's questions or answers and thinking, that's me. I've found my people. This is me, And so you can have the community even if they're not interacting with each other. A lot of people feel like part of a community just by being a listener of the podcast. Yeah. But then the Facebook page also acts as a way for them to interact with each other as well. But I find that a huge part of my community is people emailing me saying, I'm a bean, because I call my audience beans. My beans. And so they're like, I'm a bean. I've been a diehard bean for, and they just feel like part of this community, even if they may or may not have interacted with other listeners either. They just feel like they are a family.
Part of something. Absolutely. And I think that's fundamentally what people want to do now. Like you look at run clubs, you look at anything that's like popping off at the moment in terms of people being a part of something, you know, various gym fads and run clubs and, you know, various even fashion brands that are launching their own kind of communities and yoga sessions and things like that as part of a clothing brand.
Yes.
Like people just want to be part of something.
Exactly.
Now, with your podcast, you were saying, you know, you've obviously got so many people feeding all of this information in, their problems. You said, you know, you provide a solution.
Yes.
So you're getting hundreds of problems a week, right?
Yeah.
I'd say even thousands of problems a week that you're expected to solve because they're emailing you for help. How do you manage boundaries when it comes to that? Because I know that you're quite good at being able to kind of, I suppose, split your time and your energy and your effort in terms of like, I'm working, I'm with my friends.
Yes.
I'm with my family. I think that's what I was attracted to you as a person because I was like, we don't take our lives too seriously.
Yeah.
We're the two that were fucking around at fitness events that we weren't taking our lives too
We'd
seriously.
never take proper, like I would never take
photos.
proper
I was probably taking more photos than you, and then you'd message me being like, can you send them to me because I didn't get any.
We once went to that event and we never got a nice glam photo and it was me on your shoulders.
Oh my gosh,
and
I literally found the photo.
And I think I had to post that photo because I'm like, I did not take a photo at this event. That was normal.
Looking for a photo to post the other day.
And the photo's just a series of snaps of us falling to the ground.
Yeah, I'm going to show you right now because it's right here.
That's a great photo, actually.
It's so
good.
But
that's what I ended up posting because I'm like, I actually didn't take a glam shot in this activewear that they've gifted me.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I can do the content.
Yeah, exactly.
We can do the vibe.
Thank God for you. Yeah.
That's why we're friends. But I think the one thing that attracted me to you most in terms of your energy was like, you were just really authentic. Like you weren't trying to pretend to be somebody that you weren't. I mean, you're still like that years later. But I think you also were very much like, if I'm at this event, I'm present. If we're with my friends and family, like when we go to dinner, we're very similar. We're both very busy. Our phones are like our life.
Yeah.
But when we go to dinner, we don't look at them. And
we really don't.
No, and I love that though. But I think that you're the same. Like when you spend time with your family, you spend time with your family. So how do you set those boundaries in place when it comes to all of these problems coming to you? You're expected to provide a solution. Where do you draw those boundaries?
Yeah, so I used to feel like I had to reply to every single DM, and I used to. At night, I'd finish work, I'd get home because I'd teach Pilates and I just started the podcast. I'd get home, it'd be, I'd be in bed at 10 o'clock. I'd have to wake up at 5 a.m. the next day to go to work, and I'd be like, and I'd like have to scroll down to the end to make sure when was the last one I answered. Okay, I've got 30 to get through. And then I thought, I just can't do this because then I started avoiding it.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed this interaction with the audience, but I was tired. I was getting burnt out. I was like, I can't get through them. And then, of course, it became more and more and more, and it actually became impossible to get to all of them. It was just not possible. So I think now there's a few things. The first thing is that a lot of people's problems, while they are unique, can be helped or solved through a lot of topics that I have put out there. So while I'm not addressing your specific scenario, I have spoken to aspects of many people's problems. So I think a lot of people will find solutions within the podcast. Now I've got over 320 episodes.
Crazy.
So there's a huge library to choose from of all these topics. Another thing is that I have made it very clear to my audience as well. So, for example, this is where I started to feel that boundaries were being crossed, and I was feeling, I would say 99.99% of my audience is not like this. But there was this select few that there was a time where my podcast had to go down. It was this contractual dispute that I was involved in. It was a fucking nightmare. But my podcast was down for a period of time.
Read your contracts.
Read your contracts. That's like the number one piece of advice.
If you take anything out of this podcast.
Oh, yeah. As you start doing well, people are going to be like, we want to attach ourselves to your brand. And, shit gets real.
Take advantage of it.
Yeah, totally. And at the time it was great, and then it didn't serve me later at all. And anyway, so the podcast was down for a bit while I was in negotiations. And I explained to my audience, listen, for legal reasons, for contractual reasons, I'm not going to go into what's going on. But what I can say is that I don't want this, and I'm doing my very best to get the podcast back up as soon as possible. And it was really, that alone was a massive toll on me emotionally because it was my job for starters. It was everything I loved. It was, by the time that happened, I had quit, every other job and that was my thing. And I had people I had a handful of people. It's always like the small select, but they're so loud that it feels like it's more people than what it is. But I had people who would write on the Facebook page speculating why it's down. I think it's down because, and my sister's like the admin of the group. She says, please don't speculate. It only hurts. It doesn't help. Just know that she's trying her best to bring it back. People saying, well, I think it's probably that maybe an ex is suing her for defamation, or maybe she stole someone's ideas and is taught like the shit that my own audience on my own page was saying.
Stop.
And I was like, can I cut a fucking break right now? Like, I'm trying so hard to get this fucking thing back.
Leave Brittany alone.
Literally. And I was like, guys, hey, it's really not that exciting. It's actually quite a boring reason why my podcast is down, but please just be on my side. Then people saying, you don't understand that people use your podcast for mental health and they can't afford to see a therapist. It's so unfair that you're not addressing the exact reason why. And they were really trying to lay it on me. So then I just got on my Instagram stories and I got on the Facebook page and I said, you know what? I'm sorry. You're not putting this shit on me. I have given you over 300 hours of free fucking content. If you want to call it therapy, but I don't consider it therapy.
Yeah.
I'm talking about general advice here, okay? And people were just like, my own audience was trolling me, a small percentage of my audience. Because keep in mind that every time one person would post that, I would have like a band of people in defense for me, like legends. And that would represent most of my audience.
The legendary beans.
But I would post a photo on Instagram at Christmas with my girlfriends and people saying it's kind of fucked that you're posting about being happy when you're not addressing the whereabouts of your podcast. I'm like,
crazy.
Can someone let me live? Like what do they want me to do? Post a photo of me crying? So that's when I thought, no. You have to really be clear on your relationship with your audience.
Absolutely.
Your relationship with your audience is going to be a very unique relationship that's unlike any other relationship that you have. And while you can love your audience, you don't know them as people personally in your life. There has to be different boundaries. They are not your sibling. They are not your best friend. They don't know you. They know your brand. So my audience understands what I've told them about myself. But the reason that they come to me is because I have something to offer them. If I just decided to launch a YouTube channel, my life's probably not that interesting. I'm not a Kardashian. If I launched a YouTube channel just about my life, my audience would not be as big as it is. There's no fucking way. So they're not here for me. Yeah. They're here for what I have to give them. Yeah. They're here for the content. So I'm like, the relationship that my audience has with me is primarily the relationship they have with my content.
Yeah.
So when you understand that, it's a lot easier to put boundaries in place. I feel very at ease knowing that I've provided my audience a lot for free and I do it happily and I love it. But then you feel less guilty for not replying to every single email and every single DM. Yeah. You'd like to get to them, but it's just not possible. And my audience, most of them understand because most of them are very self-aware, very switched on self-aware people. Yeah. So it's fine.
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? Because I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that when you do start sharing a lot on Instagram, it's something that I found, even with a smaller following like mine, people just assume that you share everything. And, I stopped posting my now ex on my Instagram stories. And that was a conscious decision before we even broke up. Yeah. It was a conscious decision because he said he didn't like being featured on socials as much. He's not active on socials. Yep. And I was like, fine. Yep. It was a conversation that we had as two adults. And I was like, no problems. I will not post you. That's fine. Doesn't ruin my content. Doesn't ruin my life. Doesn't ruin our relationship. And that was a conversation well before we broke up. But the people that started coming through my DMs being like, well, you haven't posted him in a while. Have you guys broken up? What's going on here?
Speculating.
Absolutely. And it's like, you actually and I think, we spoke about it in episode 3, which is the live podcast. And it was like this parasocial relationship, which is one-sided, where people feel as though they know everything about you and you know nothing about them. Yeah. And I think that's where I kind of have really struggled in the past with, do I share all of this or do I not? Because I want to be able to provide people with value and feel like, you know, I'm being transparent and honest and vulnerable in certain situations. But at the same time, you're like, no, there's certain things that I just like keeping for me.
Yeah.
And I think I get it now. Like, I travel a lot for work and people are like, must be nice. And I'm like, you don't understand how many hours I'm actually working. Like, I post the fun stuff on my stories, but the stuff that I'm not posting is me sitting at my computer for 12 hours of the day.
Yeah. And you're not going to be, I mean, you could be sharing that all the time, but again, you're like, I was too busy doing work. Now it's the end of the day. Okay, I haven't,
And people would be in a coma if I posted that every day. They'd be
live
like, oh,
stream
there's Hayley again working on her computer. How fucking boring. Now, I want to go into a bit more of the like neuroscience behind kind of procrastination and launching things and, you know, the feelings that we get a lot of questions about when we're dealing with people launching their businesses and dealing with people potentially launching on a new channel or, you know, those kinds of things. One of the things we see and hear all the time is, you know, I'm scared people will judge me. I'm scared, you know, if I put myself out there, I either have to feel as though I put everything out there, which is what we were just talking about in terms of setting those boundaries, or they feel as though they have to have this certain persona about them, like they've got to know everything or they've got to be an expert in their field in order to put themselves out there. What advice would you give to people that are wanting to put themselves out there but feel as though they're feeling blocked by that?
I think the first thing you want to acknowledge is that we all have who you are right now is a representation of your past, okay? And you've created your reputation. We've all got a reputation for the way you are. Are you outgoing? Are you not? Are you driven? Are you lazy? Are you reliable? Are you not? Hardworking, all the above. So we've all got what people know us for based on our track record of behavior. So when you start to change, there will be pushback because you're changing a reputation. To expect that no one's going to react, no one's going to judge, no one's going to push back is crazy.
Yeah.
Of course people are going to push back. So the number one thing is expect some sort of a reaction. Some people are just going to say, oh, wow, you're changing. Some people are going to be smart ass and say, how long is this going to last? You know, like you get that. Then you'll get people who will actually try and cut you down, maybe because they wish they were doing what you were doing, maybe because they just aren't happy about what they're doing, so they'll just put you down to make them feel better about themselves. There's a whole bunch of reasons why someone's going to do that. But when you see someone come out of their shell and put themselves out there and try something new, someone who's insecure is hoping really hard that the other person maybe doesn't do that well. It's like, I want you to do well, but maybe not that well, because then you're just going to highlight the fact that I'm not doing well. And I'm not saying all insecure people at all, but there are people out there, we all know someone like that. So if you can expect that that's going to happen, that already takes the edge off, because it's like, okay, this will happen. But the beauty of it is that only happens until that thing has become your new reputation. So for example, if I was always late every time to every event, to everything that we met up with all my friends, I would have the reputation of being late. If I then one day was on time or early, you'd make a comment. Oh, this is, you know. Then the second time, you'd probably make a comment. Then the third, by the 10th time, you'd probably just be talking to other people. She's changed. That's what you'd be saying. You wouldn't say anything to me anymore. And that's what happens when you change your self-image, when you change your self-brand, when you change an aspect about your personality that you are desperate to change. It doesn't happen overnight in the eyes of other people, but it will change. All you have to do is, number one, expect pushback and push through anyway. And number two, be consistent enough that people will then talk about you in a different way. People say, I know this person who used to be so lazy and then I don't know what happened, but they're so driven now. They get up at this time. They're such hard workers. No idea what happened. It's crazy. And that's how they talk about you now.
Yeah.
So it's possible. You just have to be consistent.
Consistency. It's not sexy, but it works.
No.
So then with that, you know, you spoke about it before in terms of getting your Facebook group up and running and you put it off for so long. Procrastination is something that gets everybody, even somebody that understands how the brain works.
Yes.
What are some really kind of actionable things that people can do if they find themselves in this state of procrastinating? Like one of the things I do quite regularly, I don't know where I learned it, but it was like, okay, 3, 2, 1, let's go.
Yeah.
Like I'm just going to do it. Like, or just do 5 minutes.
Yes.
Is because the way in which my brain works. I'm just going to do 5 minutes and then I'm going to do something else if I'm sick of it or I can't figure it out or whatever. Hey guys, if you are listening on Spotify, do not forget to give us a 5-star rating. It will help us to reach more people. For someone that understands how the brain works, you obviously still experience procrastination.
Yeah,
it's not
of
like
course.
you're, immune to it.
Massively.
Just because you
Of course.
understand it.
Yeah.
How can people work around procrastination when it comes to actioning things that they know that they need to do?
Okay, well, there's two. Firstly, that look at why procrastination happens. There's two reasons. One is to avoid discomfort. That's the main reason why we procrastinate. We will do anything to pacify ourselves to avoid the discomfort of doing something, and it could be something massive like your BAS, your tax return, something that's like, oh my God, like the bane of my existence. Or it could be I have to fold this one tiny load of laundry, but I will just scroll through my phone instead and it's right next to me. So it could be anything, but it's just it's uncomfortable. I don't want to do it. It's not fun. So that's or it represents if I do this and I fail, it's just going to be daunting. So, but it always comes down to discomfort. And the second reason is because it's too far down on your list of priorities and it just keeps getting pushed to the next day, the next day, the next day. So it's not that it's that uncomfortable, but I've got all this important shit I've got to do. So it's going to have to be left to tomorrow. I'll talk about the first option because that's the main reason, but the second option, if it's that one, I think we mistake urgent and important all the time.
Yep.
So we will say that these 20 things on my list are urgent and they've got to be done now. But are they actually urgent? Because most of the time, if you get through these quote unquote urgent things, by the end of the day, you never get to that thing that you really want to do. That, I've spoken for 5 years that I want to pick up an instrument and I've never done it. I want to learn this language. I've been talking since I left school that I want to learn French and I've never done it. There's all these things that you say, but you keep getting put off. Why? Because you've prioritized something above that.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to identify what your actual priorities are. The 5-minute thing is a really good tool to use because you're saying 5 minutes is so doable. And if I can't do 5 minutes, it's a joke, really. Like it's 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So
you're better
I think
than that. That's what I say to myself. I'm like, you can't do 5 minutes, you're better than that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, but for the first one, I think you've got to then look at discomfort as like, what is it that I'm actually avoiding? Because discomfort is inevitable.
Yeah.
You will always be uncomfortable, but you can choose your discomfort. So you've got, I'm going to be uncomfortable by doing this task now, or I'm going to be uncomfortable tomorrow because my house is a pigsty and I'm really annoyed. I'm going to be uncomfortable studying and doing this degree now, or I'm going to be uncomfortable when I'm 50 kicking myself that I never did the career that I wanted to do. Discomfort will always exist. You cannot avoid it. So it's the discomfort of regret or it's the discomfort of the hard work.
Yeah. I love that.
And you can't escape it.
Yeah.
Life is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
So embrace it.
It kind of comes back to that whole saying of like, choose your hard.
Yeah.
Like, are you going to struggle, if you want to lose weight, are you going to struggle with a 5K run?
Yep.
Or are you going to struggle walking upstairs because you're 30 kilos heavier than you should be?
Yes.
And
exactly.
I think it comes back to choosing your heart. It's something that I say regularly to myself is like, if it was easy, everyone would do it.
Yeah.
And it just reminds me that like things aren't always supposed to be easy.
Yeah, it's so true. And I like to think of, like this is where regret can come in quite handy. So I try my best to not regret much because in general it's quite a useless emotion. But if you do regret something, use it as a lesson. So you can take something you regret. For example, I regret not having gone and studied that thing that I wanted to study. That's a great lesson. And remind yourself of that feeling.
Yeah.
I know what that feels like. Am I going to do that again? I hated the feeling of regretting not taking action. I regret that I could have, like sometimes you'll start something and then you get really good at it and you're like, I'm kicking myself that I didn't start this years earlier. And it's not like I was oblivious. I wanted to do this earlier, but I just didn't. Use that feeling as a reminder, as a reason, as a fuel. If I get up early and I think, oh God, I don't want to work out today, but then I think, I hate it when I then sleep in and then wake up 2 hours later being like, no, my morning's gone. I'll remind myself of that feeling and then I'm up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I think the last thing I want to kind of touch on from a like neuroscience point of view is around the concept of going viral. Because I think it's one of my pet peeves when people are like, I just want to go viral. And I'm like, okay, but like virality in the same space that like an overnight success takes 10 years. Virality doesn't just happen if you put one post up.
Yeah.
Or, you look at the Kardashians. They didn't really become famous until like season 6. They were posted, sharing their content, sharing their lives for so much. And then they became huge.
Like worldwide huge.
Huge. So it's like from how our brains work in identifying content that potentially becomes viral. There's obviously those different pillars of like humor and education and things like that, which is why things do go viral. But what is it about the human brain that allows us to lean in so hard to something to perhaps cause it to go viral?
Well, like why is it that like populations in general will lean into one thing and then it goes viral? Because I think well, when something goes viral, it's because people are sharing it.
Yeah.
Mass audience is being shared like wildfire.
Yeah.
And for me, for you, for everyone, the best content to absorb is one that's been recommended by someone whose opinion you respect.
Yeah.
If I'm being served an ad for something, I'll probably have to see that ad at least 3, maybe 6 times for me to be like, okay, maybe. But if you came to me and said, this is by far the best film you have to watch this, I'll watch it,
Yeah.
I mean, if I trust your taste in film, but in general, like I'm going to watch that thing. So if people are sharing like crazy, word of mouth is the best way. Not like, I don't care what anyone says. There is nothing that's better than word of mouth. So when you're making content and you want it to go viral, also with viral things, going viral is the icing on the cake, but you need a body of work to then support that virality.
Yep.
Because how many TikToks go viral when I'm talking like 50 million views, but the account is just one good video, the rest is shit, they've still got only 300 followers.
Yep.
It's done fuck all for their audience.
Yep.
Because consistency, if you see a post and it's amazing, then you go on that person's page and the rest is shit. What are you going to do? Go, oh, what a shame. Leave the page.
Yep.
If
Not
you see a
follow.
post and it was epic and you go on the page and it's just more of the same, you're like, whoa,
Yeah.
I've got days worth of content here. This is so either funny or educational or I can't wait for the next stuff. Follow. Follow, engage.
Yeah.
I will purposely go onto someone's page that I liked that one video and purposely engage with like 6 videos so it shows up on my feed.
Yeah.
It's that good that I'm going to go out of my way.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
And so there has to be a body of work behind it.
Yeah.
Like the Kardashians, like no matter what it is you're putting out there. And that body of work, you're not going viral in the meantime for most people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of podcasts that, yes, okay, they've kind of blown up overnight, but there were maybe a year's worth of great episodes prior. And the reason they stayed blown up is because people have gone to their back catalogue and thought, oh, this person's consistently good. I'm going to stay listening.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to that concept of, as well, like, yes, consistency is something that I talk about all the time. It's not sexy. People don't like hearing that it's consistency that's going to get you far, but it is. It's consistently showing up. It's consistently like, saying the same things or similar things or talking about the same things so that people go, oh, that's Alexis. She always talks about the brain or, that's Alexis. She always does Pilates. Like there's this consistency that people can rely on and humans like consistency. They like when they know what's coming.
Exactly.
Because there's that element of, oh, I can rely on it. I can count on it. I know that if I have a problem, I can go to Alexa's podcast database and there'll be a podcast there that talks to a problem that I'm going through.
Yeah.
I think from a business point of view, we see human content perform so much better or so much more than, just a logo or talking about this corporate bullshit or becoming a persona that is like corporate and boring and comatosing. Why do people, like you said before, we're talking about people trust people.
Yeah.
Why? Like I know that I can, speak to my team and they can hear it from me in the flesh and they resonate with the content that I'm sharing with them better than just sending it to them in an email.
Yeah.
Because I've delivered it and I'm somebody that they trust.
Yeah.
In the same as my, social pages and our clients' social pages. Like we know that when a business owner gets in front of a camera and starts talking about why they own the business or why they started the business, what they love about the business or the clients that they're helping, that gets so much more traction because there in front of it and people can relate to other people and people buy from other people and people trust other people, why do people relate with other people more than anything else?
Well, because it comes down to, so connection, human connection is an actual, we need it for survival. We need real human connection for survival. And we will get it wherever we can. So if it can only be via a device, we will get it via the device. If we can get it in person, even better. People who have real connection with people in person are the happiest people in the world. You know, people who think that they're connected but they're just liking and a comment here and there are the unhappiest people in the world.
Yeah.
We love connection. We need to feel related to other people through story. Story is the biggest one. People instantly switch on when they hear a story. And now a lot of marketing has kind of switched on to that tactic. If you're scrolling through social media and you're, you know, getting an ad, this, that, and someone starts telling a story even halfway through the story and someone says, and then she knocked on the door and then he ran to the door and opened, you instantly, you don't even know who she is. And you're like, well, I want to know more. You know, we are wired to relate, to storytell, to listen to stories, to see ourselves in that story. We're not wired to listen to an ad. So that's why brands, branding, advertising has to be so creative now. They have to tell it in a new way or tell it through a person. That's why influencer marketing took off the way it did, because it's a person that you trust. It's a person that you like. And that started with celebrity marketing, you know. So I think that it all comes down to this genuine survival need to feel connected. There's no greater need for us, even as like babies. You have to feel connected. So the best way that you can put a story across or put a message across is person-to-person interaction. There's no better way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think also like it comes back to I mean, it's funny, right? Because it's like, you know, you can say to me, hey, you should really go to this restaurant. It was great. I had the best experience there. They let me take my dog. He sat outside, blah, blah, blah. You'd love it. The first place I'm going to go, though, is Instagram or Google to be like, is this place legit? Is this place what it cracked up to be? So, yes, like word of mouth is so important. But I think then also having, as you said, like, you know, there's one thing to have the virality, but you've got to have a body of work to back it up, in the same way that it's one thing to, you know, have this amazing word of mouth that travels, but you've got to have assets to back it up. You've got to have...
Because it's so intertwined.
Yeah.
Like I use Instagram as a search engine for restaurants as well. If I hear the name, for two reasons. Number one, I want to see images, and website images are never as comprehensive as Instagram. I want to see photos of the fucking food. I want to see the vibe of the venue. You can't fake vibes. So I want to see that. But then I can save it to I've got 1,000 folders on my Instagram, and one is food places in Sydney, and I save accounts or just like one post from that account so that I can easily find it again. So for me, I use it as my Instagram is my vision board, my mood board, my places to eat board, my ideas when I'm in Europe board. Like it is the everything board. And that's why if you're a brand or if you are an individual who's trying to create a self-brand, you want that body of work, because if someone stumbles on your page through word of mouth, you want someone to stay there and be like, oh, I'm going to scroll through this. If your best friend shares a story of someone who you've never seen the page and the story captures you, you click on it and you want to see if there's more of the same. That's why they say, you know, when they're giving tips on if you are trying to grow your page, look at the videos that perform and just keep pumping out same shit. Some of the pages that I love, it's so similar, the content they put out. Day to day, such similar pieces of content. And I love it all.
Yeah.
I love it all. I'm not like, oh, this is so repetitive. Yeah. I'm here for it.
Yeah.
People don't mind a bit of repetition.
No, and I think also like is something that we say as well is like, you know, you think of anybody that is an expert in their field or someone that you're like, oh, I follow this person because of X, Y, and Z. Like take you, for example. I follow Alexis because she's really authentic. She shares a lot about like how the brain works, how it can apply to me, what I can learn from it, blah, blah, blah. They're only known for that because they talk about that shit all the time.
Yeah.
Like they only talk about that.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, you wouldn't be known for doing your podcast if you only had 4 episodes.
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't be known as a neuroscientist if you only talked about it once a week.
Yeah.
And so it's like that consistency again of repetition. And if you want to be known for something, turning up and talking about it all the time.
Yep.
Like people know I'll talk their ears off anybody about building their personal brand.
Yeah.
LinkedIn. Like I will tell you 1,000,001 reasons why I think you should be on LinkedIn in any industry.
I need to get on LinkedIn.
We need to get you on LinkedIn. I actually meant to tag you in a post the other day and I was like, oh, she actually doesn't even have LinkedIn. Like, I don't even know if this is a new like friend ick. Like my friend doesn't have LinkedIn.
It's like a rare species. I think that the reason I don't have LinkedIn is because for so long I thought LinkedIn was all about, how to get a job, like to get a job.
Absolutely.
And so because I had, at the time I was teaching Pilates, I'm like, I don't need a job. I don't need LinkedIn. And so then I started the podcast or whatever. So then I just thought I didn't need it. But now I feel like LinkedIn, maybe I thought about it wrong. Maybe that's not what it was in the past, or maybe it was. But I feel like it's definitely evolved massively. And now I feel like LinkedIn is so much more than that. And I think like, have I missed the boat or is it not too late?
Absolutely not. We'll get you set up this week.
Yes.
We'll do dinner. We'll get set up on LinkedIn.
It's
going to be great. No, I think you're so right though about LinkedIn. Like, it's one of the biggest misconceptions. I do a lot of talks at schools. And it's one of the biggest misconceptions is like people think that LinkedIn is only to search for jobs. But I think that they do themselves a disservice. And I have a lot of friends that work at LinkedIn. And Catherine was on the podcast, before. And I said, in that episode, I was like, when you look at, when you update the app in the App Store and it's like, Instagram needs updating, LinkedIn needs updating. When you look at the description of the app of LinkedIn, it says job search and network.
Right.
And so I was like, that in itself doesn't explain what goes on the platform.
No.
So it doesn't lend itself to be a social media network. It doesn't lend itself to be a professional network.
Yeah, when Kitty was talking about it when we did the panel, I'm like, oh shit, there's so much more that I need to learn.
We'll have like an intervention. Me, you and her. We'll go dinner, we'll set up your LinkedIn. We'll get you flying.
I need it.
Now, we briefly touched on it before, and in episode 3, the live panel event, you spoke briefly about the contracts issues that you've had with the podcast. And I'm not going to go into them. I know what's happened, and I think that you freely speak about what you want to speak about that. But if you could go back and do the podcast, if there was one thing that you've learned in your time of doing the podcast, and you could go back, or you were to start a new podcast now, what would you do differently? What would you do the same?
One thing that I would definitely do the same is I actually really liked that I didn't have too much of a back catalogue of episodes. I think some people think they've got to be so prepared. They'll do 10 episodes, 20 episodes. I've even met people and they think, no, I need it in case I would rather have a week off than have that much of a back catalogue before I've launched. I can do a back catalogue now because I know what I'm doing. But prior, by the 3rd episode, I had learnt so much. By the 10th episode, I had learnt so much. If I had done all 10 before launching, it would just be plateau for the first 10, then a step, plateau. Like, I like this
feedback.
Evolution with the constant feedback. Yeah. And the feedback is, yes, what your audience tells you, but you learn as you go. You yourself pick up on things. You start becoming more aware. I'm listening to other podcasts. I'm getting ideas. I'm like, I'm just more in tune to what needs to happen. So I would definitely do that the same. Yeah. I wouldn't overthink it. I kind of just dive straight in. Don't overthink the artwork. Don't overthink the logo. Just take the leap of faith.
Yeah.
Of course, what I wouldn't do the same is I would do certain things earlier. I would have created like the Instagram, TikTok and Facebook page straight away. There's just no reason why not. Who cares if it's got one? It just helps with traction later down the track. Yep. I would have been doing video way earlier.
Yeah.
I waited so long to do video. And for the most part, it's because I was just recording on my bed, to be dead honest. So I was like, oh, fuck filming this. Like, that's just so random.
Was there any times that you just lie in bed and you're like, okay, I've got to record this podcast, and you're just like lying in bed and you're like,
yes, absolutely.
I love it.
Definitely. There would be times where I would be recording my podcast in bed, pause, go down the road, get like a muffin and a coffee, come back, be munching on the muffin. Sounds really inappropriate. And in bed.
I love it.
And and then you just never know because so it was very, very much I was running like a very like tight budget at the start.
Yeah.
But yeah, video content, if you can do it, I would have done that a lot earlier because I feel like my video definitely helps a lot. And people love the video. They really respond well to it.
Yeah.
Of course, when it comes to contracts, don't ever sell yourself too short.
Yeah.
Be really mindful of contract length as well. I think sometimes you'll start and someone will offer you something good and you're like, oh my God, they say promise. If someone sees, not to turn you into an asshole with a huge head, but if someone sees promise in you, it's not because they're like, oh, doll, I'm going to take a chance on you. It's because they say dollar bills.
Yeah.
That's why. Okay? They're a business. They're here to run a business. They're not a charity. So you have to look at it as I'm really grateful that I've crossed paths with this company or business or partner that sees potential in me. Why do they see potential in me? And is this a fair transaction?
Yeah.
You know, do the math. Look at what they're asking because I didn't do that at the start. And I was thrilled for the first half of the contract, devastated for the second half of the contract until things come to light. You start growing and then you realize this is a very bad deal I got myself into.
Yeah.
So I think, and people do that all the time. I'm definitely not the first and I won't be the last. Like this happens all the time, but it's just back yourself a little bit.
Yeah. Or have the right people in your corner to be able to I think one of the, again, a recent saying is like, don't ask how to do it, ask who to do it.
Yeah.
Like I think far too often someone tries to become a jack of all trades.
Yeah.
And instead of going, actually, like, when I started my business, numbers is not my forte. Like I dropped out of math as soon as I could because I fucking hate numbers. Like I get basic numbers. I get, when it all adds up, I get the basic accounting 101. But I pay my accountants a good amount of money to do that job for me because I do not have the brain capacity to do that. So I think in your, scenario, it's like having those people in your corner that have your best interests at heart and you can trust in making that decision for you.
Yeah, it's so important. It's so important. And, at the start when you're on like a shoestring budget, you really are like, oh, but I can't be spending that money. I can't. And sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
But the moment you can, whenever possible, even like get friends into it. Sometimes you're embarrassed to ask for help. Ask for help. It's so important. Even just get a fresh set of eyes to look over something that you're doing. Someone that you trust, obviously.
Yep.
But I think it's really important just to start to get the help whenever you can because I've done that so many times where I've tried to just do it all and then I get burnt out and then all the energy that should be going into the podcast goes into all the other little peripheral things and then it's time to record and I'm like, oh, I'm so tired.
Yeah.
It should never be like that.
Totally. I literally spoke to my team about this the other day around energy management. Like I think there's this big conversation around time management, like how do you fit everything into your day? Like you've got to manage your time, you've got to habit stack, all of that. And it's like I actually think something that's far more efficient is managing your energy. Yeah. Like if you only have 60% energy that day, how are you going to best use that energy in your day to maximize what you need to get out of it? Yep. Instead of going, okay, cool, from like 6 till 10, I'm going to do this, then 10 till this. It's like, but are you even looking at how your energy levels are or, how you feel in the morning versus how you feel in the evening or anything like that? So I think energy management is huge. Now, before we I've got some questions that have come through on Instagram, but I've also got the quick fire questions that we finish. Now, before we go to that, what is coming? Like, I know you can't talk about a few exciting things that you're working on, but what is coming in terms of for you, but then also where do you see kind of your brand, but also maybe the podcasting world going? Yeah.
I don't see the podcast world slowing down at all. I think it's still, I know that the amount of podcasts being released is not as much as, I think the biggest year ever was 2020 or 2021, which aligns with COVID and all of that. So that makes a lot of sense. But it's still like crazy numbers every year of people releasing podcasts, people having ideas for podcasts. So that's not going anywhere. That's not slowing down. People love this long form content. I think people think that, our attention span is shot to pieces. It's not. I think it's only because you pay attention to, like your attention span is according to the environment that you're in. If I'm watching 15-second videos back to back and then something that's 10 minutes come up, I'm like, whoa. I'm just doing this like in between tasks. I'm not here to watch a 10-minute video. If I go to the cinema and sit down, I'm not even going to look at my phone for 2 hours. Yeah. So we have the attention. It just comes down to like good entertainment. Are we being entertained? Are we interested?
Yeah.
Do we care?
Totally.
So
It's like watching a
podcasts.
10-part TikTok.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you've ever found yourself like, I love true crime, right?
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I will watch
same.
an entire like interview
series.
at
Yeah.
a police station, which runs for like an hour in like 30 parts on TikTok because I'm interested.
Because you're interested.
Yeah.
And so I think that obviously cinema has, but, you know, Netflix has debunked that. We'll binge a whole series in one day. It's got nothing to do with our attention span being short. It's what's the environment?
Yeah.
Am I interested? Because we do have a long attention span if we want to. So that's the first thing. The second thing, what was I talking about now? Talk about attention span.
No, we do have an attention span.
I have an attention
no,
span.
You're saying the future, like what's coming.
Yes.
As
So
podcasting.
So that's for podcasting. Me personally, I always see myself creating like, I don't know, I see myself with my podcast itself definitely doing more. I want to do more video, more production, more add-ons to the actual podcast itself. Definitely more books. There's just so much potential and growth in that space. I said this I think on my first ever episode, and I still stand true to this. I don't know how it would unroll, but I want my own Netflix series or binge if you're listening, or Stan, I don't care, but a series, okay?
Anybody. Disney Plus.
Disney Plus. I love Disney Plus. And I don't know even know how that would be, but I'd love to have a series about something. So stay tuned.
Do you know what I can see you doing? You know Louis Theroux?
Yes.
And how he goes and interviews like psychopaths.
Yeah.
Like
I
you
love
could
him.
do that though from like a psychological point of view and
Yeah.
interview like narcissists,
High
or
performers.
like fuck boys and like
F1 drivers.
Formula One drivers. We love the
I'll
Formula
go through
One.
each driver 20 episodes.
There it could be like Formula One, like I don't know, the mindset and
The
it's like
mindset
you
of
just
Carlos
unpacking.
Sainz. Yeah, but actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's
Okay.
just so much potential. So,
Netflix.
So a series. And
Years
I
enough.
honestly, I don't know. I think I'd also like to eventually I see myself launching another podcast in the future alongside mine.
Yep.
Do You Fucking Mind will always be like my ultimate child.
Yep.
But I don't know. I always see myself maybe doing something more lighthearted or whatever, because there's a side to me that does come out in my podcast that's really, you know, joking, lighthearted, relaxed, but sometimes it can tie into the topic, sometimes it can't. And when I do, people are like, oh my God, we loved this comment that you made, ha ha ha. So I thought, you know, maybe in the future I could be doing something that's a bit more, I don't know, relaxed, chilled.
Yeah.
Not so much planning going behind each episode, because there's a lot of research that goes behind my episodes as well. So it's like a fully fledged thing, which I enjoy. I love it. But
I joke about it being like, you know, I'm just going to start one on my kitchen bench with like the girls coming over for dinner.
Yeah.
And like just talking about the problems that they've had that week.
And doing it just for
Just for
yourself, you know, just doing it because you
if
enjoy
they're
it.
experiencing those problems, like I said today, like I had a couple of calls that I had to solve problems, and I'm like, I feel like people just call me all the time to solve their problems.
Yeah.
Like I'm the person that people come to, clients, friends, family, like I'm the fixer.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if people are experiencing these problems, there'll be other people that are experiencing these problems. So it's like, why can't we just unpack them together
It's so true.
over pasta?
It's a great idea.
Yeah.
Why not?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's fucking do it.
Let's do it. That's exciting. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Now, look, people do send in questions. We've got the ability for people to leave voice notes on our website, which I
love
love.
that.
I actually love a really good voice note, but I also put it out on Instagram to see what questions people were asking, and there have been a couple that have come through already. The first one that they wanted to ask was around the book writing process. So they've said, like, what is the book writing process like? How involved are you? And how much do you write yourself?
I write the whole thing myself. Okay, so
Ain't no ghostwriting
so
over
there's
here.
no ghostwriting going on here. I write the whole thing myself.
I can attest to that, because
Yes.
you've turned up to dinners before where you're like, I have literally just spent all day
I'm like,
writing.
all day writing. I'm going to hit the deadline. I've like gone to Bali just to write. I've taken myself to Brisbane to my parents' place just to write. Like sometimes I have to get away because it's just not happening to slot into my daily routine. I write the whole thing. The only thing that I obviously don't write are the edits. So the way it works is you have your publisher. You write and you decide how the book is broken up. So for example, with my publisher, we said, okay, let's break it up into 3. I submit 1/3 by this date, 1/3 by that date, 1/3 by the other date. within reason. If I'm having any problems, we can, play around with those dates. But just so the publishers always also have a good idea of how it's going to work with editing and whatever. Yep. The publisher then goes through it and does all these track changes to be like, they're someone who is looking at it with fresh eyes. So they're able to be like, this looks better here. You've repeated yourself 1,000 times. I'm going to remove that. This, maybe, and then they'll leave notes like, I want a whole paragraph where you expand on this. You've just mentioned it once. So then it comes back to you. You look at that and you can dig your heels in and say, no, I want to keep that because whatever. And sometimes they'll say, okay, yeah, fair. Sometimes they'll push back. I've never had that where we've totally disagreed on something, but you can. And then, you add things if you think, oh, yeah, that's such a great idea. I find that in general, they're the experts. So I've not really had too much of an issue in general.
Yeah.
So then you do all the corrections. Then they take it back. And then they'll look at that again. If they're happy, they take it to a proofreader. The proofreader goes in and does the proper grammatical everything. They fact check everything you're saying as well. So sometimes the proofreader doesn't do it. Sometimes it's a professional fact checker. Yeah. So if I'm saying, oh, this scientist said this and whatever, they have to go and fact check that and make sure that I'm not just spitting shit.
Fact checking your book.
I'm like, and this study that was done in this. Like I quote so many studies in my books. So yeah, RIP to whoever has to do that. And then they give you the final edit. You go through the whole thing. And then for me, I also do the audio recording component of my books.
Yep.
So sometimes they give that to somebody else. I remember the first time for my first book, they said, okay, and then we're going to get this recorded. Were you interested in auditioning to be the voice for your book? And I was like, no. I am the voice of the book. What do you mean? What? Auditioning. This is my book.
Could you imagine your book narrated by Morgan Freeman?
Although I'd be down for that. If they got Morgan Freeman, I'd be like, bow down. I'll gladly accept the defeat.
Elba.
Or who?
Idris Elba.
Yeah, exactly.
Vibe.
So if we had lords reading the book, I'd be fine with that. And I was just like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, we've had some authors who have insisted on reading their audiobook and they get into the studio and it's taken 10 days instead of 3. It's just been the biggest saga. They've never asked. And I'm like, fair enough. I understand that that's your protocol. However, I speak
to my podcast
for my profession. And so I'm like, and so they're like, oh, let us speak to the audiobook people. And then I think the audiobook people are like, oh yeah, no, definitely get her to read it. That's her audience. It would be so weird if I had a podcast.
So weird.
So then they were like, okay, no, we're not going to make you audition.
Interesting.
For the book. Yeah.
Amazing. I love that.
So that's the process. But yeah, I do write the whole thing. A lot of people do have ghostwriters or a lot of people who can't sit and write will have someone who kind of shadows them for a while and they will interview them a lot and then write based off that.
Yeah.
But I write the whole thing, yeah.
Amazing. The next question we have is how do you fit everything into your day? You seem like a very busy woman. She is a busy working woman.
I am a busy woman, but one thing that's very probably not obvious is that my levels of attention and focus and drive and intensity fluctuate dramatically from day to day. Dramatically. I will have high performance days when nothing gets in my way. I'm like, I am just devouring everything that comes my way. It's just bang, 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 nothing. I haven't checked my phone. People will say, oh, how nice was it that on so-and-so's stories? It's been 3 days. I haven't seen anyone's stories. Yeah. I'm like, what, when, where, what? Because I'm just... And then there'll be days where I meander into my office and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to go on realestate.com because my friend's looking for a house. 2 hours later, I'm like, oh my God, I've done fuck. So that's the honesty of my levels of attention. But the beauty of it is that I know what needs to get done from week to week. Mm-hmm. I've got the skeleton amount of things that I have to get done. And then I've got things that, if I have time, I'm going to record maybe more podcast episodes as a back catalogue, or I'm going to be putting ideas to this or lending my time here. So the main thing is that I always get the skeleton done. And I think everyone needs to identify what that skeleton is for them. And if you work a 9 to 5 for someone else and you're trying to start your own business, then it's going to be harder for you because that skeleton to operate what you want to do has to exist outside of those hours. So it's obviously very difficult. But for me, if I run in the morning, it helps me focus so much better throughout the day. If I meditate, of course, in the morning, that will always help me. If I'm not on my device for the first hour, ideally 2 of the day. It's anything that's going to help your focus span, because we talk about like time, dedicating your time like you were speaking about, but it's also the importance of dedicating your focused attention.
Yeah.
You know, because you could spend 2 hours on something but not be focused. So, yeah.
Okay, there's so many questions here, but I'm just going to – there's the last one is on your podcast you talk about everything from sexual inexperience to manipulation to friendship breakdowns, as well as understanding gaslighting, anxiety and mental health issues. They're all such broad topics and obviously range hugely. How do you balance content how do you balance the content people want and the content you're wanting to talk about?
That's a great question. To be fair, there are some questions, some requests that come in that are just too niche and I just would not do an episode on it. And the reason for that is that my podcast is for the general population.
Yeah.
And it's a very wide-reaching audience.
Yeah.
So I do have to be selective. And there are times where people have suggested certain topics that I'm like, oh, I would love to talk about that. That's so interesting. But it's so specific. And it would only apply to the tiniest population that I wouldn't really be talking about it on my podcast because that's not my audience. You do have to cater to your audience. Once you have an established audience, yes, it is your show, it's your thing, it's your brand, but you want to keep them coming back.
Yeah.
So you have to cater to them to an extent. The beauty of it is that so many topics that I talk about or that I have spoken about need to be expanded on, need to be added onto. So someone could say, oh, can you talk about this topic? And I could say, look, I'm not going to do a whole episode on that topic, but that ties in heavily to this broader topic. So I can have it as one of the factors. Like if someone says, can you talk about this behavior that a gaslighter does? Like, no, but I can talk about gaslighting and that is one of the behaviors and I can tie it in. You know, so there's so many times where I've been able to merge the two together and use one topic and blend it into something I want to talk about. There's been many times that I want to talk about things on like specifics of pharmacology that I'm like, no. Like, firstly, I need a diagram. If someone's not watching the video, it's going to go straight over. Like, I just can't. There's certain things that I think my audience would be like, why is she going in so much depth about this particular cell biology? Like, we don't care.
Yeah.
So you've got to find a way of like
balancing it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's so much. I actually joked with my team before we chatted today. I was like, actually, I don't think I'm going to be able to fit everything that I want to talk about with Alexis in one episode. Yeah. So it's like, you're going to have to come back for a part 2.
We'll have to. We'll
do another one. We'll be around the kitchen table.
The kitchen table?
With the pasta.
Yes.
We'll solve problems.
Let's recreate that grana pasta.
Oh, yes.
So good. I went back the other day and it was so good. And I'm like, vibes.
Now we're going to end on 3 questions. I ask these 3 questions to everyone. You know these 3 questions because you're on the live panel.
I've forgotten them, so.
Great. We'll strap in. First question is, name one brand that first comes to mind or is top in mind for you.
I think I already said this, but Red Bull.
Why?
I used to work at Red Bull and I genuinely believe, I've thought it then and I think it now, their marketing strategy is fucking phenomenal. Yep. They are so good at marketing. Research the founder of Red Bull, Dietrich Mateschitz. He passed away last year, poor dude. But he was old, lived a great life. But yeah, just the way they market things, it's always been ahead of the curve, against the grain. Unbelievable.
Yeah, they've stood for something. I think that's one of the things that I see with Red Bull is like, you know, some of the best marketing that I see is people or brands that stand for something. Yeah. Which means that there are going to be people that don't agree with them. Yeah. And then there'll be people that are fiercely loyal to protect what they stand for.
Totally. And they're just so they have, it's literally a world that they've created. They've got, you know, their music academy, they've got their charity, which is Wings for Life, which is all about, you know, trying to work on, you know, irreversible spine damage and things like that. So they're just like this, I don't know, I just look at them as like the ultimate brand.
I love it. Second question, what is one thing that you think helps keeps a business or a brand top of mind?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know what I said last time, but to keep it top of mind, every time you're sharing a piece of content or providing a piece of content, I try to ask myself whenever I can remember, why would somebody share this? There's a difference between you liking something and you liking it so much that you have to share it. There's a tipping point. What is that tipping point? Yep. And it's easy to know what the tipping point is. Ask yourself. Just say, why would I share something? You know? And something's either so funny and it's on par with the humor of your friends. I'm putting this on my story. It's like, this is so good.
Mm-hmm.
It's either this is me, I see myself in it, that I have to share it because I'm sharing a representation of myself. Yep. How often do people post something on their story and say, oh my God, me? Yep. And then they share it.
Or a quote that they wish they could say out loud, but don't.
Exactly. So when you post, say, is this compelling enough that someone would want to reshare this? And not all your stuff has to be like that, but at least 1 or 2 a week should be compelling that someone would be like, I need to reshare that.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. Last thing, quote that is always top of mind for you. I know you can't use the Dr. Zeus one that you used before.
Whether you think you can or can't, either way, you're right.
Oh, I love it. Oh, that's a good one.
Mm.
Alexis, thank you so much for joining me. I've loved it. I'm like, I don't want to stop talking.
I know.
But
This is just like our dinner.
I'm comfy. Someone bring us dinner. We're good to go. We'll have to do an episode 2 because I think there's so many questions that have come through on my phone.
Definitely.
And I'm sure that there'll be questions after this that people are like, you should have asked her this. Or I go and I'm like, oh, I should have gone into that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for giving me your time. I have loved watching your brand grow. I think not only as somebody that obviously knows you, but somebody that, you know, has watched you grow from a Pilates instructor and like a fitness influencer all the way through to who you are today and like, you know, being recognized on the street and growing a brand that is just so authentically you, and it's something that you should be really proud of.
Thank you so much.
I've loved chatting. Thank you for
having me. You're amazing at interviewing, by the way. So it's a skill that
and
you
I
have.
get severely uncomfortable with compliments, so we're going to end it right there. One last thing from me. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love if you could leave us a review or hit the subscribe button wherever you are listening or watching this podcast.